Welcome into the Bite Meat Podcast, and of course, brought to you every week by our friends over at Texas Star Grill Shop. And I'm always excited. I get excited every week when we start the Bite Meat Podcast. It's one of my favorite hours of the week because we get to talk barbecue, and we get to talk barbecue with some of the greats in the business, pitmasters from all over the country, and experts in the field. Before we get started, I got a good guest today. I've been wanting to get him on, and in fact, I was just talking about it. His ears must have been burning when I was talking about him with Doug Scheiding before we came on. But before we do that, just remember to subscribe to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We always recommend Podbean first because that's where we upload it and host it, and you can get every single episode ever on Podbean. But you can get it anywhere. You can get it at iTunes, Spotify, or any podcast host there is. But let's not bury the lead here, man. And I guess it's two leads. So we got Bill Purvis from Chicken Fried Barbecue. And I promise I'm not even going to ask you one question about the name because I know you get asked about it a lot. Just trust me. The name works. It's Chicken Fried Barbecue. It's not chicken fried anything. It's barbecue. That much we know. And then the other lead is, and I put this in my rundown that I kind of sent you there, Bill. How many trophies can one guy win, man? I mean, you just did it again in Austin. I mean, leave some for the rest of us, buddy.
Yeah, man. I get lucky every once in a while for sure.
Often. So tell us about Austin. Tell us about Austin real quick and what exactly it was that you guys won.
So Austin Rodeo is it's a CBA, sanctioned by CBA, and it's one of the bigger rodeos in Texas, and it's a qualifier, and actually you earn a spot on Champions Row at Houston Rodeo. So they have interchange agreements between Austin, San Antonio, and Houston. So the winners of those contests get to cook the other contests for free. So to me, that's the big prize. I grew up in Houston. My mom, my parents still live here in Houston. So to be able to cook Houston Rodeo and cook it under my own team name. So, every year I get teams that want me to cook for them. But with Houston Rodeo, whoever the head cook is, that's who gets to go on stage. That's who gets the trophy. So, and it's not necessarily, there's a 20-year waiting list to try to get a spot there. So you can't just sign up, early in the year to get a spot. It's a long wait list. So, Doug cooks it, but, Doug doesn't get to cook it under Rogue Cookers. He cooks it for another team. And that's pretty synonymous with most of Houston. It's a lot of legacy teams and a lot of competition guys are cooking for those other teams. But with the win at Austin, that gets me back on Champions Row where I get to cook it under Chicken Fried Barbecue.
And what did you win exactly?
So yes, I won. I was third place chicken. There was about 230 teams, and I got third chicken, second rib, and third brisket. So pretty much ran away with that one.
So that's the grand champion right there.
That was the grand champion. When I got that third place brisket call, I knew that there was no one that could catch me in the overall. With me having top three calls, and I leaned over to my wife and I said, "We're going to be back on Champions Row," because I won San Antonio 2 years ago, and that got me a spot on Champions Row. So, and I was able to get a first place chicken at Houston Rodeo, which was it was awesome to get one of those iconic bow-legged trophies. Man, it was it was just. I mean, they only give out 3 of them, first, second, and third. So to walk away with first place chicken at Houston Rodeo, I was extremely blessed. So
yeah, absolutely, and you're right. Champions Row. I was there for several days. I was there in the morning with Ronnie Killen and some other guys that cook. It's fantastic. It's something special. What would you just a little stream of consciousness here? What would you consider, let's say, the top 3, 4 cooks cook-off competitions in the country right now?
Man, definitely for me, and I'm from Texas, so obviously Houston Rodeo's up there. American Royal, which anybody can go and cook that as far as the open, and it's usually about 500 teams, so that's another one. And then to me the Jack Daniel's, which I was able to cook it as well. So I cooked it 2 years ago and tied for first place brisket. So those are the 3 majors, and I've been fortunate enough to to able to actually pull trophies out of all of them. So I've walked several times American Royal. Like I said, Jack Daniels, we won first place sauce and tied for first place brisket. So, but yeah, those are and Memphis in May is a big one as well, but it's all pork, and Texas, we're all beef. So
we're all beef. And we're going to get to that. I know you have some incredible competition classes that I definitely want to talk about later, because I think a lot of our listeners, they basically just heard your resume, and I'm sure they were wowed by it and might want to get a piece, might want to get a piece of that. So we'll get back to your competition classes, but we do want to dig into some barbecue here that we can talk about. Now, just for the record, you are in Magnolia, correct?
Correct.
So yep, I'm guessing, and born and raised Houston.
Born and raised in Houston. Got married, moved out to the Woodlands, and then once my kids got old enough and they were no longer in school, we moved further out into Magnolia.
Yeah. Yeah. I say all that to sort of to lead to this. Texas, born and raised, competition, lots of trophies. You're not leaving enough for the rest of us, but that's all right. But it leads to the question of beef, and we have a lot of great pitmasters that come on this podcast. But I kind of want to dig in on the beef, the brisket, beef ribs, whatever it might be. Separating yourself. And I'm not necessarily talking about competition, because we have a lot of backyard pitmasters that listen to the show as they listen to your podcast. What's the name of it, if anybody wants to find it real quick?
So the name of mine is Shiggin Fried with Chicken Fried. And shiggin is a word that's coined by Darren Worth, the GOAT of barbecue. And that's kind of barbecue espionage. When you're shiggin, you're trying to pick up, you're watching somebody trying to pick up what they're doing. And it's, so we do Shiggin Fried with Chicken Fried. Yeah.
All right. So we're all shiggin today. We're all shiggin today with Bill Purvis. And I want to get into the beef. And we've had so many great pitmasters, champions talk about their style, but I want to get in with you on separating yourself. That's kind of the entry point in my mind here. Even as a backyard pitmaster, the little things that can separate someone from saying, yeah, we had a good time at John's house and it was good barbecue, and them saying, man, that was something special. What would you tell our listeners, like just some of the little things that they people tend to forget?
I would say meat quality. I mean, as a competition cook, if you want to win brisket at a competition, I mean, it all starts with the quality of the marbling in the meat. And just because one prime brisket is labeled prime and another one's labeled prime, it doesn't mean that they're equally as good as one. So even with the primes or the choices, man, sometimes a choice brisket might have more marbling with a prime, I mean,
yeah,
I think meat industry, they rate the ribeyes. They're not going through every brisket and rating it. They're actually, they're grading the actual ribeye. So, but yeah, I mean, definitely meat quality is, man, it's super high. Man, if I'm going to a competition, I want to get the best quality, the most marbling brisket I can find. And usually I know if I can't find a decent brisket that week, man, I've got an uphill battle trying to get a quality brisket. So meat quality for sure. And it's, man, as a comp cook, you're going to, HEBs, the grocery stores, you're looking at a lot of meat throughout the week. Even if my wife sends me just to go get cream cheese, I'm going by the meat department and I'm looking to see if there's any jewels in there. So.
Well, that's a great tip. That's a great tip right there. That's exactly what we're here for. Because, two things. First of all, everybody talks about marbling and meat quality and what you're talking about here in a general sense. But when our listeners and myself and everybody are looking at a brisket, okay, you see the fat, you see the tip, you see the flat. How do you see the sides? I mean, are the sides enough, or what are you looking at to say, you know what, that one probably has the kind of marbling that I want? Because it's a huge piece of meat.
It is. And I mean, obviously a lot of the cryovacs are somewhat clear. So you just have to look at the different windows inside the cryovac. And, anywhere there's a window, I'm looking, and when you look at a brisket, the most tender part of the brisket is going to be the end towards the point of the brisket. Down towards the flat, that's going to be your lean, if you will. So I do examine that lean and see if I can look at the end of the brisket towards the end and see how much marbling is in that lean. If that lean's got some decent marbling, then I know the rest of the brisket's going to be great. So I'm always kind of looking at the lean, if you will, knowing that's going to be the leanest part of the brisket. It's going to have the least amount of fat. But if it has good marbling inside that lean, and I'm looking for kind of fat striations, almost like candy cane on the top of the brisket. I want to see the white stripes, if you will. I don't want to see a whole lot of red. And of course, in competition, we're all cooking Wagyus, and, shout out to HEB, they carry Wagyu. So, for us in Texas, it's, we can go to HEB and we can throw them through a couple of Wagyus at some of the higher end HEBs. They have them for sale. And, a lot of the comp cooks are rifling through those to find the best ones.
And then the other thing that I wanted to get to on the beef, on the brisket is, look at brisket. Like you just mentioned it. Even if she tells you, hey, go get me some cream cheese, you're going to stop by there. I mean, that's how you can stockpile them. And then what do you do with them? Because, do you freeze them? Do you just try to go, what are your advice? What's your advice there?
So it's brisket and ribs that I'm always, ribs, they just throw them all in a big trough, right? There's not a prime, a choice, or select. There's no one really grading ribs. So I'm looking through ribs and I'm looking through briskets. And if I find ones that, man, I think these are going to be money makers, doesn't matter what I have in my freezer, I go ahead and buy it and I put it in the freezer. So my wife is like,
another really brisket, huh?
Yes. Yes.
So how many, if you had to guess, how many you have in your freezer right now?
I probably have three briskets in my freezer, and I have another freezer just full of ribs. I mean, it's packed full of ribs. So,
and that's how you get there. Okay. So the other thing is, and digging in here, is there a magic thickness when it comes to the tip? Because for me, that's what I'm always looking at. It's so hard to cook sometimes for us amateurs, when you have a really thin tip and a bit really fat, no matter how good, you might be able to trim it. Is there a magic number, or does it matter to you?
I kind of like the mid-sized briskets, because I feel like that if you get a big 22 or 23 pound brisket, a lot of times those are just a lot of fat, whereas if I get a 18 to 20 pound briskets, kind of the sweet spot that I go for. That, man, it's got ample amount of fat, and it's thick enough for a slice. We're trying to put these slices in a box and present them to the judges, and they got appearance score, so you don't want to put in a real thin fajita looking brisket slice,
right,
because we're separating them too. We're separating, we got burn ends as well as the slices. So I want, to some degree, a thick brisket, but I'm not a slave to thickness, man. I'm a slave to marbling, because marbling and the mouthfeel, that's where you win brisket in competitions, is the taste. You don't win on appearance. Appearance are easy points, but man, you really win on taste. And even if it's a little bit thinner and the marbling is good, man, that's going to be better than a thick slice that doesn't have as great a marbling. So I try not to slave myself to thickness, but you always want to turn in a nice, pretty thick slice.
Yeah, and I want to get to that in a second, but the other thing I wanted to get to was beef ribs. That's another one. That I've always called it the best single bite in barbecue. If we're, day in and day out. But you do have to look for certain things there. And what would you recommend?
Man, on the beef ribs, I would definitely go with prime. You don't need to go to Wagyu. The beef prime ribs are great, and we call it brisket on a stick. At the end of the day, it's brisket on a stick. But yeah, I mean, for the beef ribs, I mean, you cook it just like you do a brisket. It's the same process. It's you cook it to the color, and once it gets the right color and the right bark, then you wrap it, whether you wrap it in butcher paper or foil or whatever your preferred method is. And competition, we're doing a lot of foil. There's not a whole lot of us that are doing well with butcher paper, just in a sense that it's faster with foil. And we want to sleep, we're waking up at 5, 6 in the morning and really powering through it and cooking really hot and really fast. So,
that's interesting, because there's a big movement and loyalty to butcher paper, including myself. I'm not going to exclude myself, but if you want to go faster, you tend to go foil, huh?
I do, yeah. And if I'm at the house cooking something, man, I love butcher paper. It preserves a little bit of the bark, But in competition, bark can hurt you more than it can help you, believe it or not.
Mhm.
It's a whole different world in competition. These judges are given in Texas a plastic knife and a plastic fork, and it is the cheapest
Yeah.
plastic knife. I mean, it's like a sport, and if you put something in there with a really nice textured, crispy kind of bark, and a senior citizen goes in there, they can only go
Yeah.
in the box once, and they happen to pull out just bark and they chew it and they go, oh, that's not very tender.
Mhm.
Then you're deducted on your score. So it's a game of risk. If it's too barky and too crunchy in competition, it can hurt you.
Yeah.
So there's not many doing butcher paper per se. So
Yeah, and then presentation matters even for backyard cooks. You want it to look good,
yeah,
but
yeah.
it's a different world, man. And I've seen enough of your cooks. Your chicken it looks so good. I mean, it looks
Right.
so good. And this is maybe where we should talk about some of the competition classes that you have, where people can get a hold of you and learn some of these things, and then I'll follow up.
Yeah, I mean, I have my classes are online, so I have it at Barbecue Champs Academy, and there's several pit masters there that are online. My class online is focused on drums, cooking on 55-gallon drums, if you will,
Mhm.
which is pretty popular in the competition world. A lot of guys, it's easy access to get a couple of drums. So I would recommend, if you're looking to get into competition, man, go there, find someone. Doesn't necessarily have to be me. If you're cooking on an
Mhm.
offset, take a class from someone that cooks on an offset, because my techniques that I'm using on a drum are completely different than the guys on offset. So,
Mhm.
and most of the classes, if you were to get into competition, man, it's the techniques that you really want to learn.
Mhm.
And the techniques are different depending on the type of cooker. So
Yeah.
drums, if you're drums, take my class. If you're an offset, find one of the other guys on there. There's probably about 10 or 12 pit masters.
Mhm.
Most all of them are world champions that are on that site. So it's a good source. I mean, I've even taken some of the classes from some of the
Sure.
guys on. So
Sure, absolutely. I mean, we have some very well-renowned pitmasters that listen to this podcast a lot, just to get those ideas. Which really, I mean, it's one thing that you're so good and have won so much, whether it's you or someone else that have won a lot of trophies. But if you're not evolving, the judges tend to always want to find something different from one year to the next, right? So you have to kind of evolve. How has that evolving been for you?
well, I mean, I've been really fortunate. I've made a decent name for myself in competition barbecue,
Mhm.
and I have my own products that I'm using in competition. Like I just recently released a brisket wrap,
I was just
and
going to
it's a
ask you about that. I
yeah,
heard about that.
and it's been selling like crazy. So, but for me, as I release products and a lot of teams are using my products, I always have to be looking for something next,
Mhm.
because if it's say it's a jelly contest and everybody's turning in strawberry jelly,
Yeah.
because they find out it's winning. Man, one guy starts turning in grape jelly, and everybody finds out, oh, grape jelly's hitting. So now everybody's doing grape jelly. So
Yeah.
it's you always
Mhm.
have to be looking around the corner, if you will, to try to find something to separate yourself that gives you that little edge to get that last call of the day, if you will.
Yeah,
So
and glad you were reading my mind there, because I heard about this recently released. It's a liquid based wrap.
it
Tell us
is.
about what that is.
So it is in competition, most guys are wrapping in a pan, like a foil pan, almost like a
Mhm.
lasagna pan, and
Mhm.
almost braising their brisket. And they're sticking in, beef broth or maybe some powdered injections, because the wrap really, as much as we inject our stuff, but the wrap of whatever you wrap your brisket in or your ribs in can really impart a lot of flavor.
Mhm.
So this is it's a mixture of beef broth and some other stuff, as well as some sugar. It's kind of got a sweetness to it.
Mhm.
Most Texans backyard don't want sauce on a brisket, but for whatever reason in competition, if you're not saucing, man, you're not winning. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just, whether, and I don't know if it's, I kind of think when people go to a barbecue restaurant and they taste barbecue, a lot of times, maybe back, 15, 20 years ago, they would get it with sauce on it. But
Yeah.
now everybody is sauce on the side for the most part. And they may take a little bit of that brisket and just dip maybe just a tip of it in just to get a little bit of sauce in it. And
Mhm.
So it kind of gives a little bit of sweetness to the brisket without it actually being sauced. And
Okay.
it's been scoring. It's been scoring great.
So when you turn in your brisket, it actually is not sauced or sauced less, or how does that work?
It's sauced a lot less.
Yeah.
I still will put a little sauce, a little thin layer of sauce on the top of it and cook that thin layer on. But as far as the actual slices, if you look at a lot of competition cooks, especially like KCBS, man, they're drenched in sauce. I mean, if you want to win in KCBS, you need to be saucing your slices for the most part. I mean, there's still some teams that will just maybe take au jus and just drip over it and hit it with a little salt to give it a little extra flavor. But unfortunately, sauce is a big part of competition barbecue.
Yeah. Well, it also is, and I've argued with people on this because I don't sauce a lot, but I mean, I love my sauce. In fact, I for the first time ever, and this is mostly for our listeners, not necessarily you. I've had my sauce. I've been making it for 25 years, but I've had it on the market for about 3. I just got confirmation from American Royal. They got my entry, so I'm actually entering my sauce in American Royal. So if they have 300 teams, I just want to be in the top 290, top 295. That's all I'm looking for right now. So, but so I obviously sauce. I like to do it, but I also feel like there's a fallacy, or maybe it's an old tradition, wives' tale, pitmaster tale, whatever you want to call it. There's a lot of guys that are gruff about it. Like, oh, if you're saucing it, it's not real barbecue. And I look at them and I'm like, it's better. I mean, it tends to be like, what is it with that old school? Oh, I don't need to, if it's cooked well enough, you don't need any sauce. Well, I'm like, I like it with some sauce. I mean, where do you fall on that and that whole concept?
Well, I mean, I'm developing my own sauce as well. I haven't released it yet, but I mix my own sauce and I use for competition. I get lots of comments on Instagram. Hey, what's that sauce? We want to, they want to buy the sauce. So, but man, everything I turn in has sauce on it. It just, there's no way to really win without sauce, unfortunately. And I get lots of death threats and hate mail on Instagram. There's no way you're from Texas, and there's no way that brisket, you got sauce on that brisket. And it's like, man, this brisket took first place at second place at San Antonio Rodeo with 300 teams. And guess what? It has sauce on it,
Why do you think that is? Because I get that too. And I get in these arguments like, oh, you don't need it. And I'm like, yeah, you kind of do. You kind of do.
Man, I really don't know if it's some kind of false pride that some people in Texas have that, and granted, man, there are plenty of briskets out there that I've eaten that, man, I've eaten them without sauce. They're delicious, I mean, burnt bean is one. I don't know if you've had Ernest on, but man, his restaurant in Seguin, his brisket's delicious, but he also has sauce. He's got a couple of sauces, and those sauces are great too, so, man, I grew up eating chopped beef sandwiches and sandwiches, and they all had sauce on them. So
So you said you grew up, and I know a lot of our listeners are sort of thinking what I am right now. How did this all start? You've reached the pinnacle, and you're still blowing and going. How did this all start?
So I was in the logistics industry for the oil field. So up by the airport, and we shipped a lot of oil field equipment all over the world. And as a part of that, most of our clients, whether it be like Schlumberger, National, well, a lot of the oil field manufacturers, they all wanted to go to the Houston Rodeo Cook-Off. And so our company actually sponsored a team just to get wristbands for all of our clients to go. So for 4 or 5 years, and I was the VP of sales, man, we would get 30, 40 wristbands a night. We were paying a team, $10,000 for sponsorship so we could have these wristbands. And I became buddies with the guy that ran the team. And he kept, kind of poking at me. Hey, why don't you come out and cook with us at at another event that wasn't Houston Rodeo, which eventually that's what ended up happening. I went and cooking some, local events around town, around Houston with him that weren't necessarily as big as the Houston Rodeo. And man, I thought, shoot, I can do this. I don't necessarily need to cook with you. I think I can cook. I've cooked my whole life. And I cooked a lot of times, being in the oil field, man, we were always cooking for clients, whether it was showing up, we had a big trailer pit, we would show up and we would cook, fajitas or whatever, golf days. So we were always entertaining customers, and I was the one that was always kind of cooking as well. Never really
Mhm.
competition, but always
Yeah.
cooking for customers and whatnot. So I would cook for our office. We'd have 160, 170 employees, and man, we would do a day where we would treat the whole staff, and man, I would get out there and cook briskets or whatever for everybody. So
Mhm. That's
but yeah.
fantastic. But I am curious, like serious barbecue. Everybody will do some burgers or steaks, but like serious barbecue, relatively recent, or have you been doing that all your life too?
Oh, man, my first brisket I cooked when I was I bet I was 21 or 22 years old,
Mhm.
my very first brisket. But I would say in and out of it, if you will.
Yeah.
But man,
Yeah.
always wanting to play in the kitchen, as
Mhm.
well, whether it was Italian food, making Alfredos, always playing around with, like I said, enjoying cooking, really.
Yeah. All right. So let's get to another couple things here before we let you go, because we like to just list some things that can help our listeners. And one of the other things that I sent you is, and I've talked with other pitmasters about this, even the highest levels, say there's always maybe a little bit of anxiousness, even though you know what you're doing, you're confident in what you're doing, you've got it down to a science, and all that little bit of anxiousness, when you finally either turn it in or start to slice it and taste it and all that, of like, okay, did I really nail it?
Right.
That's compounded by the backyard pitmasters. They don't do
Right.
it as much as you do, or even I do. So how do you fight that anxiousness?
Man, it's muscle memory. It's muscle memory for me, because I do competitions just about every weekend.
Mhm.
I don't sell rubs and brisket wrap by sitting on the couch. So I'm out there every weekend trying to promote my brand and cook. So, I'm cooking a brisket just about every single weekend. And even with me, man, it's easy to second guess. You're
Sure.
cooking on feel, and man, does that feel right? Man, is that too much? Is it over? Is it under? It's
Mhm.
easy to uh, but I write down my timeline. So every cook off I go to, I'm writing down what time I put brisket on, what time I wrap, what time it finished. So I've got a frame of reference to some degree, that every cook, I have it all on my phone.
Mhm.
And I can look back and go, man, I got first place brisket at this contest. Let me look at
Doing
my
this.
timeline.
Yeah.
Yes, let me look at my timeline on this one, because a lot of it to me it's a tenderness game in competition. It's whoever gets the most tender, juicy barbecue, you've got to, it's not necessarily, you want good flavor, but there's a lot of rubs, there's lots of spices out there that can give you a good flavor. But at the end of the day, it's tenderness that wins the competitions. It's not
Out,
so.
out of curiosity, what do you have coming up these next few weeks?
So this weekend I'm headed to Pleasanton, Texas,
All right. I was
which
born and raised in San Antonio, so I'm very familiar.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the following weekend I'll be at Alvin Music Festival, which is probably maybe 250 teams, 300 teams.
Okay.
Our good buddy Ronnie Killen, he usually cooks it. I saw him
Mhm.
at the rodeo as well.
Yeah.
He's been a good friend as well. But yeah, I met him out there at Alvin, which was, for me coming up was kind of iconic to have Ronnie come over and want to meet me. That he follows my Instagram, so it was really cool.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And people can find you where on Instagram and other social media.
Chicken Fried BBQ on
All
all
right.
the platforms, whether
Yeah.
it's Instagram, Facebook, it's all Chicken Fried BBQ.
All right. One more nuts and bolts type thing here, that I often ask a lot of people, but I'm curious on yours with chicken. Everybody says, don't cook to temperature, cook to look on certain meats. Is that different with chicken? Do you cook more to temperature with chicken?
I do. I do. I run needle probes inside my chicken, which ThermoWorks, it's instant read thermometers, the leave-in thermometers, and ThermoWorks makes these they're called needles, so they're real small, so they don't leave a big hole. But
Hmm.
for chicken, I'm always, man, I'm cooking definitely to temperature for sure. Now
Yeah.
that temperature changes because depending on how hot my grill is running,
Hmm.
sometimes I'll pull my chicken off at 160 in the breast. Sometimes
Hmm.
if my grill is running really hot, because you have carryover, once you pull it off, it's still going to carry over. And the hotter the grill is, the more carryover you're going to get. So
Yeah.
if it's screaming hot, I may pull my chicken off at 156, 157 degrees,
Yeah.
knowing that it's still going to carry over. So
I'm laughing because I did that this weekend. I did some chickens and some ribs, and all of a sudden I looked down and the temperature was like 350, and I went, "Oh no, how did that happen?" And it was starting to get a little too crispy on the outside. So I did exactly that. I pulled it at like 158, 159,
yeah, yeah,
and just let it set. And it was perfect. It was perfect. But
yeah,
that's
yeah.
that stuff. You got to muscle memory as you
That's
mentioned,
right.
etc. One other thing that I always like to have our guests do, because I feel it's important, because this barbecue community is so special. Everybody's friends. Everybody says the same thing. The best part about the competitions is really the other competitors and the friends that I have there, more
Sure.
so than competition. And the other thing that everybody in your position and others do is they stay very involved in communities, and they stay very involved in charitable organizations, foundations, etc. So I wanted to kind of just give you the platform, if there's any that are particularly important to you, if you could talk about them a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I would say probably PTSD. They put on a big cook-off every year. That's probably the one that's closest to me, just because, man, I've had friends in the military. I never served in the military, but
Mm-hmm.
I would say the PTSD Foundation for sure. So at a moment in time when I first started my rub, a portion of my sales went to them. But yeah, that's probably the one that I would promote the most out of all of them. So.
And anything coming up real quick? But you mentioned your rubs, your sauces, etc. When can people expect to see that?
Well, my rubs just got put into Home Depot, so about 900 of the 2,000 stores, along with Doug as well, and
I
several
saw
others.
that.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so we're all really excited about the Home Depot. They've picked up both of my rubs. I've got a rib grind and a sweet rub. I'm working on a third rub as well, but yeah, I'm constantly working on the next product, and I like to test it in competition first before, if
Mm-hmm.
I know I can win with it and I know I'm going to use it, then I'll get into mass production and put it out on the market, because I don't want to have a bunch of products that I'm not necessarily using.
Mm-hmm.
The sport's expensive enough as it is, so if I can
Yeah.
develop these products to where, man, I'm not buying a sauce, I'm using my own sauce. That's kind of my, and if I can't win with it, man, I don't want to release it and just have a
Exactly.
sauce out there that I'm not going to use, and I'm still having to buy other sauces. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I've got a sauce I'm working on and another kind of a beef rub that I'm working on.
Awesome. Man, this is, I could go on for another half hour, but I won't. I'll let you go. This has been awesome. I will hit you up down the road again and hopefully see you somewhere. Hey, you never know. Maybe even at the American Royal, I'll see you.
There you go.
If a bolt of lightning strikes, but I'll definitely catch up with you down the road. Really appreciate it, man.
No, thanks a lot. Appreciate you having me on for sure. Enjoyed it.
All right. That's Bill Purvis coming up, our weekly smoking hot tip of the week. And we'll get that to you right now.